Hi, I'm Bonnie Browning with the American Quilter Society, and boy are we lucky. Today I have Kathi Carter from Vineyard, Utah, who is the Best of Show winner here at AQS QuiltWeek in Phoenix. How does it feel to be the first Best of Show winner here?
It's awesome. I am so excited.
And the name of your quilt is?
Isabelle.
And that has a special meaning to you, doesn't it?
Yeah, Isabelle is our first great-grandchild, and her dad served a mission in Japan, and so it was appropriate that Isabelle got the Japanese garden quilt.
Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we take a walk back into the exhibit hall and take a look at that quilt and talk about it in depth.
Okay, thank you.
Well, okay, here we are inside the quilt show, and we're right in front of Kathy's Best of Show quilt. Now, Kathi, I know that the one thing people are going to want to know is how did you make it? What was the predominant technique you used?
It is a machine applique. They are turned edges, but they are done by machine.
And so did you use a special thread to do that? Because, boy, you don't see those stitches at all.
I use Superior threads. It's a monofilament, and it's polyester, and it also is a matte finish. And then I use a really tiny zigzag, like a 1.0, 1.0 width and length.
Well, and so the key is that matte finished translucent thread.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
And then just tiny, tiny zigzag.
Well, and then some of the other elements that you put on here. Now, let's go back to the applique, because you told me there are quite a few leaves on this quilt. How many?
There's about 2,800. I kind of lost count.
And so did you spread that over a period of time, because that would get really old quickly, I would think.
Yeah, it did. It would sit on the timeout chair, and my husband would say, "Aren't you going to work on that?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Oh yeah, I'll do 500 more leaves, right?
And I thought I had finally done enough. I mean, I carried bags of leaves with me everywhere I went, and I got to putting it together, and I still had over one border that needed more, like a border and a half. So I counted it up, and it was like another 600 or 700 leaves, and I was like, oh no. Yeah.
You were glad to have that part done, weren't you?
Yes.
Okay, so now one of the other techniques you used on your quilt is the piping that you put in there.
Yeah, I really like Susan Cleveland's piping hot ruler. It allows you to cut the piping at a perfect 1/4 inch, and so it just turns out perfect.
Well, it adds a lot to your quilt.
Thanks.
Now, I know that you used a color scheme that's kind of unusual, so tell us how you decided on what colors to use.
Well, at one of the quilt shops near me, I found this print with the roses, and it was just such an unusual shade of pink and blue, and I went from there.
Well, it turned out to be really lovely. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the quilting. You did this on a long arm, and what kind of long arm did you use?
I have a Statler, and it's real easy to disconnect and do it hand guided, so I did use the Statler, the computer part, just for the texture on the gold fabric, but the rest of it is all hand guided.
And so the Statler is connected to a gamble, right?
Yeah, that's the main sewing machine, but then when you add a computer to it, it becomes a Statler.
Oh really? I didn't know that.
From Paul Statler. He's the one that invented that part of it and sold it to Gamble.
See, I just thought that was the computerized part of that.
Yeah, it is, but the sewing machine is a Gamble, and I have the biggest one, the Optimum. But then once you add the computer to it, it calls a Statler Stitcher.
Statler Stitcher. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so you did a variety of different quilting stitches in here. In the background, in that dark fabric, you did kind of a viney design, didn't you?
That fabric had a pale gray vine, and I adjusted to 15 stitches per inch, so that it was much tighter, and I could do the little loops and stitches around the vine.
So then you could just follow it. And so did you hand guide that then?
Oh yes, yeah. And one lady was asking if I matched the fabric, but I didn't. I would just fake the vine from piece to piece where they joined with a seam, and maybe add a few more leaves or continuous vines so that it looks like it, but it's not, because that would have been impossible.
And so then you did some just like circle backgrounds on the green fabric.
I did. That's pebbling, and that you just circle around until you find an exit point, and then you circle to the next one, and so on, and just keep making little circles.
Fill it all in.
I pebbled around all the leaves.
Well, and so in some of the pieces that you have on here, you've actually followed the outline of the fabric, which is a nice trick to get lots of texture, isn't it?
It is. I did that on the background fabric in the big circles, and used a matching thread, and I used So Fine by Superior because it's such a nice thin thread that almost every stitch you're backtracking over to get a continuous path. And so the So Fine doesn't give you that thread buildup. I didn't want
so
the
it doesn't
thread.
look like you've gone over it 2 or 3 times.
Right, right.
Well, all right, is there anything else? You did some piping along the edge as well when you did your binding?
Yeah, I like that. It gives you a nice perfect corner.
Uh-huh.
Probably the trickiest thing about making this quilt was that the whole middle, all the way out to that final gold border, needed to come out to the exact size, because this border, every block had to have that black continue, and it's not adjustable like a plain piece of fabric. And so if the middle with all the borders didn't come out to be the perfect size, the outside border wouldn't fit and work.
So you had to make sure that you had the whole center of the quilt the perfect size to add the borders onto it.
This final green circle border, because each of those blocks has to match to have the black continue, and then it has to match at that corner. There's no flexibility. So that was actually, I mean, yeah, the leaves were a challenge, but that was the hardest thing about the whole quilt. Yeah, it was.
Well, congratulations. We are
Thank
so
you.
proud that you've won the first Best of Show here at AQS Quilt Week in Phoenix.
Well, I am very honored. Thank you.